Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Apologies for the 5-minute delay in starting. My name is John Danilowitz. I'm a director of Right to Freedom, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's session. I want to thank all of the attendees for making time in their day to join us, and of course, a special thanks to our distinguished panelists and my colleagues at Right to Freedom who worked to put together today's event. I'm going to start with just a couple of administrative announcements laying out some of the ground rules. For those of you who've joined, you've probably noticed that as attendees, you are not on video and you don't have permission to talk or use the chat. Those permissions are going to be reserved at this point for our panelists and the host. You are, however, encouraged to ask questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. I'm going to ask each of our panelists today to begin with introductory remarks of about 10 minutes. Then we will have a pause and we will go through a question and answer period. When you ask questions, you're welcome to remain anonymous if you choose. However, if you would like to be identified, please type your name and affiliation with your question. We won't be using the screen names for identifying individuals. We'd prefer to use real names or for participants to remain anonymous. And as noted, we won't be using the chat function during the webinar. As you may have noted, the session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on both YouTube and Facebook Live, and we will post a video afterwards, and we will make other use of the transcript. At this point, I'd like to introduce the president of Right to Freedom, Ambassador William Milam, to make some opening welcome remarks. So Bill, over to you.
Well, thanks, John, and thank you for the rest of you for contributing to this occasion, which is the first attempt of, I think, the Right to Freedom organization to use this particular kind of way of getting out the information and that we're trying to get out and use to help solve human rights problems and really political problems really in Bangladesh. I can see that my particular computer has a particular thing which it keeps going sour on me, and you see a band at the top and you see my head sort of freeze. When that happens, I have to turn it off for just a second, and I can turn it back on, and I'm back to normal. I kind of wish I could get back to normal in other ways so quickly. In any case, welcome to everybody who's here, who's watching, and I hope you will enjoy what I know I'm going to enjoy, our panelists, and the rest of this morning, not until noon at least, when we're going to have, I think, hopefully a very, very definitive and good discussions among the panelists and hopefully the guests who we don't see right now. The Right to Freedom is a fairly new organization in a sense, so we created it back right, I think, at the time of the pandemic was starting, which wasn't a good timing on our part. And we really sort of went silent for a year or so. We did a couple of meetings, public meetings, not very well attended and not very interesting in the end. Well, except for the one with Shahidul Alam, which went pretty well, and he has become a good friend of the organization. But we've been branching out since then with the great help of the National Endowment of Democracy, and we started, I think, a serious season of events around the first of this year, and this is now our third or fourth or fifth one, and this is the first one we've done in this particular mode. But I'm very happy you are able to attend, and I hope you enjoy what's going to follow. And I won't take up much more time because what's coming is much more interesting than what I've got to say. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Bill. And we'll hear from you again after the presenters have spoken and to wrap things up at the end. I'd now like to introduce our Executive Director, Mushfiq Fazal Ansari, who's going to give us brief introductions of our four presenters. So Mushfiq, over to you.
Thank you, John. As we delve into the crucial topic of defending human rights in Bangladesh, I am honored to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers who bring diverse perspectives and extensive experience to this important discussion. We are happy to have Meenakshi Ganguly with us today. Initially, John Shipton was one of our panel speakers, but unfortunately, he's not able to join today for an emergency. We are extremely thankful to Meenakshi Ganguly for joining us today. Meenakshi Ganguly is Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Asia Division, overseeing this work in a number of countries in the region. She joined Human Rights Watch in 2004 and was formerly South Asia Director. Prior to joining Human Rights Watch, Ganguly served as a correspondent for Time magazine, and before that worked with the Press Trust of India. She researched and documented a broad range of human rights issues in South Asia, including failures in the criminal justice system, discrimination based on religion, caste, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, rights of refugees, violence targeting women and children, crackdown on freedom of expression and association, as well as serious rights violation during an internal armed conflict. She has published numerous articles on South Asia, including for the Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, Scroll, Oyad, Dhaka Tribune, the Kathmandu Post, among others. Our next speaker, Professor Dr. Ali Riaz, is a distinguished professor of Illinois State University of Political Science and Government, a non-resident senior fellow of Atlantic Council and president of the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. He served as visiting researcher at the Varieties of Democracy Institute of University of Gothenburg, Sweden in 2023, and public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. He taught at universities in Bangladesh, England, and South Carolina, and worked as a broadcast journalist at the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, in London. Riaz has published extensively on Bangladesh and author of more than 20 books. Yasasmin Kaviratne is a regional campaign at Amnesty International South Asia, focusing on Bangladesh. She's also an award-winning journalist from Sri Lanka and has nearly 20 years of experience in media and activism in the region. Our next speaker, Sanjida Islam, was in the corporate world, living a perfect work-life balance. Her world was shattered when her brother was picked up by the plainclothes officers of state agencies. Since then, she has been looking for her brother with evil. As her closest family members become the victim of enforced disappearance because of political activism, she started organizing the families whose near ones have been picked up by same manner as Sanjida's brothers, and they have been waiting for their loved ones to return. They have been looking for two things: either the return their loved ones, or the state shows their graveyards where their loved ones. Or the state shows the graveyards where their loved ones' last remains are put. The trauma of this horrendous experience brought Sanjida to activism. She is the lead organizer of Mayer Dak, the platform which have been fighting for families of the enforced disappearance. She is also executive member of the Aino Shalish Kendra ASK, which is a leading human rights organization in Bangladesh. She also worked with the UN Working Group of Enforced Disappearance for her daily activism. Sanjida keeps constant contacts with the human rights bodies, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Robert Kennedy Human Rights, to name a few. Sanjida is an iconic example of standing for human rights against the face of brutal authoritarian regime. She's speaking our panel discussion from Bangladesh. And before handed over to our moderator, who is moderating our session, John Danielowicz, let me introduce him. John Danielowicz is a retired Department of State Senior Foreign service officer with extensive experience in South Asia. During his career, John provided leadership of some of our most dangerous challenges in diplomatic posts. His career highlights include service of a deputy chief of mission at the US embassies in Dhaka, Bangladesh, South Sudan, as a principal officer at the US Consulate General in Peshawar, Pakistan. And John Delonage is our board of directors of the Right to Freedom, also is an editor at large, newly publishing a foreign policy magazine from Washington. John, thank you, and over to you.
Great, thank you, Mushfiq. Just a reminder to all of our attendees, first, again, thank you for your presence. I see a growing number of attendees, which is great. We will be collecting your questions throughout the program. We'll ask questions to our panelists after the final panelist has spoken, but go ahead and submit your questions and answers using the Q&A function at any time. So with that, I will turn it over to Meenakshi Ganguly from Human Rights Watch. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having Human Rights Watch join your panel. Before I start, I thought it would be good to pull back a bit and talk about what human rights means. And, you know, human rights, we split it into two. We talk about political rights, and we also speak about economic and social rights. Now, in Bangladesh, there are a number of issues we work on, which is labor rights, climate, migration, issues that are of serious concern in Bangladesh and should be drawing a lot of focus. However, for the government, human rights is very much linked to the political rights of and the political movement, and therefore defending human rights in Bangladesh, which is the title of this webinar, is often considered almost a crime by the authorities. A number of human rights groups and civil society organizations in Bangladesh are now facing enormous pressure, as including the media, the legal fraternity, and so on, because they're speaking towards one of the most key functions in a democracy, which is to defend the rights of citizens and to draw the attention of the state to those failures in an effort to work together and resolve them. Now, in particular, in Bangladesh, we are concerned about the political freedoms because there is an election that is coming up. And to set out the context, the two previous elections in Bangladesh have not been free and fair by any standard. And almost all members of the international community have repeatedly told the government that they expect the government to do better as the country prepares for elections going forward. Now, because it's in an election context, I do want to set out some of the problems that particularly occur during elections, because as we go forward, we've already seen excessive use of force last week. So just to set that out, in previously around elections, we have seen a spike in arbitrary arrests, in torture, in extrajudicial killings, and in forced disappearances. Sanjida, who you will be hearing from later, will tell you about her brother, who was also disappeared around elections. And therefore, at this point of time, one of the things that we really need to be alert to is to ensure that this election is one where Bangladeshis are able to exercise their choice in a safe manner. And to that extent, we are particularly concerned not just about the responsibilities of the Awami League government, which is supposed to be holding these elections, but also the role of security forces. And in terms of the security forces, we have to be very careful to understand the security forces and indeed all independent institutions in any country, which election commissions, the judiciary, and so on, remain independent and objective and are not partisan. We have not had an encouraging view of this in the past, but we are looking forward. This is the expectation now. To that extent, we would like to see that security forces are not biased in how they respond to any kind of right to expression, freedom of expression or freedom of association, that they enable political parties to function in a way where they're able to express their views. The security forces should also recall that in because of their previous actions, there are already, the Rapid Action Battalion is now facing sanctions by the US government. It is an indication of the government's, of international community's concerns about security forces that act in a way that is so egregious, where the abuses are so egregious that they need to be sanctioned. We have long called for the Rapid Action Battalion to be disbanded altogether. It was created in a situation where Bangladesh needed this kind of elite counterterrorism unit. It has been around for decades, and there should, of course, be a civilian law enforcement agency, but it should be a rights-respecting one. And unfortunately, what we have also seen is that the Bangladesh police has not been particularly rights-respecting. We're already hearing accounts of torture in custody, of beatings, of being biased in how they respond to actions of ruling party supporters, as opposed to those of those that belong to the opposition. We would also like very much to see that one of the well, actually, let me hold back a bit. There is a leaked document from the police that indicated that the government this time, under international pressure, is holding back perhaps on the more egregious violations of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings, and instead wants to manipulate the judiciary in some way to disqualify the political opposition from even running by ensuring convictions. Now, a government that interferes with the judicial system of the country, that cannot provide due process and rule of law, will be one that will not be viewed with great confidence by its own people, and certainly by its friends and strategic partners. And therefore, a compromised judiciary in any form that is seen to be one that is being unfair and is not addressing due process will also be extremely concerning. And this is therefore something that the criminal justice system of Bangladesh, which is not, after all, a political organization, should respond to with great responsibility now, and make sure that they operate in the way that upholds international standards. I think I'll stop here, just because I think there'll be room for questions, and I think all my colleagues have very, very important points to make, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for those remarks and for kicking things off. And again, just remember to all of our attendees that the Q&A function is open, so we can start collecting your questions and answers for when the fourth speaker is finished. I will now hand it over to Professor Ali Riaz from Illinois State University. Ali, over to you.
Thank you, John. Thanks to Right to Freedom for arranging this and giving me this opportunity to speak. Let me build on what Meenakshi has already alluded to. What we are witnessing leading up to the election, as a matter of fact, even before the election season started, is a violation of human rights, particularly the excessive use of force by the police that Meenakshi has referred to in recent days. But most importantly is the ongoing phenomena, what is called the ghost cases. That is, the cases that, frivolous cases, unfounded cases, in some cases, these are completely false cases are being filed against the opposition activists. That has been going on since 2013 in Bangladesh, but each time when the election comes, those goes up. As Meenakshi has already referred to, that there are widespread apprehension based on some documents that have been made available, leaked document, that the judiciary might not be actually be acting neutral, or at least being used. As a matter of fact, what we have seen in these ghost cases, most of these things is that either these incidents have not taken place, yet the cases have been filed, and in most cases, the activists have been targeted. We have also seen ghost cases such as incidents have taken place that have been exaggerated, and hence they have added names, just those who are activists in the area and those who have been speaking out against the government. Third type of ghost cases that we have witnessed is that completely frivolous, in the sense that one person have been charged with 5 cases in 5 different places for 5 different incidents, which is physically impossible. So these cases are being filed to basically make sure the activists, particularly the opposition organizers, cannot act on the ground. Leading to election, if there is an election on time, we would see that this would be a major problem. And hence, the judiciary's role becomes an important one. And what we are witnessing is that the human rights activists are facing, not only human rights activists, but most importantly, the common citizens are facing a difficult situation, which has been going on for quite some time, but it is accelerating. It has accentuated. In case of Bangladesh, to understand the human rights situation, we can also look into those who are trying to defend the human rights. What are the situation? According to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who are human rights defenders? They define, and I quote, the people who individually or with others act to promote or protect human rights in peaceful manner. Recently, we conducted a survey of 50 human rights activists who were chosen based on this definition through a very rigorous purposive sampling of 36 districts. And what we have found that over 80%, practically over 86% of human rights defenders have, those who are working at the grassroots level are saying that they're facing significant obstacles, including threats, intimidation, and harassment. These human rights defenders have told us that they perceive the situation is deteriorating. That is 46% have described this as worst or near worst in the recent months or years. Where does this come from? When we asked them, human rights defenders reported that threats and intimidations primarily comes from state-connected sources, such as law enforcement agencies, state intelligence, and government. These three, that is the state agencies, state intelligence, enforcement agencies, government, were identified by 42% of the respondents. 23% of the respondents told us that they are facing these intimidation from the ruling party activists. These are really concerning, deeply concerning. Family members have been targeted. At least 10% of the human rights defenders have told us that their family have been harassed or intimidated or face threats, And these are causing enormous problem for the human rights defenders. One of the things that threats and harassment significantly impaired their lives, 28% of them have told us that they have scaled down their work. 10%, more than 10% actually said that they relocated from their areas. These are the data. These are the ones that is gathered through a very rigorous survey. This is what the human rights defenders are facing as we speak. In case of Bangladesh, what are the instruments for human rights enforcement? Meenakshi has mentioned about the political rights and others. Let us look at the political rights. According to the Constitution, according to the existing laws, there are actually two instruments for human rights enforcement in Bangladesh. One is the judicial one, and the second is the institutional one. Let me start with the second one. The institutional one is the National Human Rights Commission. In addition to, of course, those are the ones, the human rights organizations that we know of, who are facing enormous problems, not only recently for a long time, as it happens with other countries too. Human rights organizations face the obstacles, a lot of problems. Lately, it has been an issue because of the 2016 law, which creates serious hindrances as to whether the human rights organization, as a matter of fact, all NGOs can receive foreign funds. However, if we look at the national one, National Human Rights Commission, over the last years, since it came into being, it has not actually been successful in achieving the respect of the human rights activists. Why? Because their operation, their activities have not been supportive to the human rights activists. Despite the fact that this country, Bangladesh, United States has to impose sanctions on Rapid Action Battalion, yet we have not seen that the enforced disappearance, or for that matter, extrajudicial killing has been investigated by National Human Rights Commission. They have either shied away or actually skipped the, any kind of state agency involvement They have not investigated. There are very few minor examples, particularly given the extent of the incident. So the institutional weakness is there. Now the other thing is the judicial one. Would like to have a respect on that. Human rights defenders, when they were talking to us, they have mentioned that 36% of human rights defenders choose not to report incident. Why? Because they have lack of trust on the legal system. And they are afraid of being, fear of retribution. And they think that there are inadequate investigations. So these are the one. But let me refer to one incident that has happened recently. On 6th of August, what happened in court is very significant. I'm not exonerating anybody with this respect, but the comment made by a judge is very important in understanding the situation. What happened is this: 18 lawyers went to a bench of the High Court to file a petition for an anticipatory bail. Something happened before that, whatever happened, this was, again, I'm not condoning that, but the point is that they went for an anticipatory bail. 18 lawyers we're talking about. And these lawyers went to 2 benches. They didn't hear those petitions. Eventually, they ended up in the 3rd bench, where this 2-member bench finally agreed to hear their petition. Next day, they said, we're going to hear it next day. Okay. The lawyers requested for a verbal order to the judge that can you give us an immediate, so that we are not being arrested. At that point, one judge made a remark, and this is published in press. I'm not making it up, this is published in press. One judge remarked that there's no point issuing a verbal order. Why? Because, according to him, previously people who have been arrested, despite being granted bail by the court, and those who have been arrested also alleged to have been tortured. That's why, tortured in custody. The judge remarked, and this is sort of quote, that the High Court does not have that standing anymore. So this is the judicial situation that we are witnessing with respect to protecting the fundamental rights. As I said, going into the election, and this election is going to be a significant election for Bangladesh. I think this would be a transformative election for Bangladesh. Either way, either it would move back on track for democracy, or it would, go through this track of being a closed autocracy. But that is what we are witnessing with respect to the human rights situation. And unfortunately, unless situation takes a dramatic turnaround, I'm afraid that the situation would get worse in the coming months as Bangladesh proceeds to the election. That has been the case with 2 previous elections, 2014 and 18. And we know what these 2014 and 18 elections are. I don't have to go into the details. If I quote Economist, it was transparently fraudulent. If I quote New York Times, it was farcical. Everyone understands that. So with election coming, with the situation that we are witnessing on the ground, I'm afraid that things might get worse in the coming days with respect to the human rights situation in Bangladesh. And I will stop there. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you.
Great, thanks, Ali, and thanks for introducing some of the work from your survey. That should generate some questions from our attendees as well. I know we have some survey junkies in the audience as well. So with that, I will now turn it over to Yasmin Kavaratni from Amnesty International, and apologies for my mispronunciation of your name. And please, Yasmin, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having Amnesty part of the panel. I was actually asked to focus a bit more about the ongoing challenges in defending human rights. So I thought I'll touch upon a few issues that we're working on, especially in the current climate of disregard towards human rights. One main challenge we see is impunity. How appallingly widespread and deep this issue runs in the country. Whether we're talking about enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, custodial deaths, incidents of torture, attacks against minorities, committed by RAB, police, other security officers. So whenever authorities fail to conduct impartial and independent investigations into these crimes and fail to bring the perpetrators to justice, you're building a culture where crimes are tolerated and rights are violated. I also want to touch upon state interference in judiciary that Ali just explained in detail, as well as institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission. So last we checked, though NHRC is intended to act as a key statutory body to, a quote here, protect, promote, and ensure human rights in Bangladesh, it has been criticized for lacking independence from the ruling party. We mentioned this in the UPR statement earlier that Amnesty issued as well, that the last published report on human rights violations and statistics by the NHRC was, I think, in 2018. And in March 2021, they submitted a proposal to the Ministry of Law seeking expansion of its powers to investigate complaints made against the police, because that is what majority of the complaints they've received. But as far as I know, to date, this proposal remains under consideration as well. So I'm just jumping from issue to issue because there is no investigations, there is no, the lack of impunity is, sorry, the impunity is very tangible in all of these issues. There are constitutional violations, such as the constitutional guarantee to freedom of expression. Digital Security Act is not the only tool that has been used to curtail freedom of expression, but I want to speak of it considering the recent update. There are so many people arrested under the Digital Security Act simply for exercising their right to freedom of expression. For example, Shahnawaz Chowdhury should not have to face a trial to defend a Facebook post he wrote on the negative environmental impacts of a coal power plant. Khadijatul Kurba, Haritosh Sarkar, and other minors should not have to go through incarcerations and solitary confinements and tried as adults in court. Our calls on the DSA have been clear from the beginning. Repeal the DSA and release those who have been arrested solely for exercising their freedom of expression and drop all charges against them. We stand by that call. The problem is we don't know what the new Cybersecurity Act entails. So it's important that the government allows open discussion and get consultations from NGOs and experts before voting it in as an act. Because there is bad precedence. We know how the ICT Act was repealed and the DSA emerged. So it's really important that the new act should comply with international human rights law. Another constitutional guarantee I want to talk about is the right to peaceful assembly, which includes right to protest. There have been serious human rights violations. The first half of December 2022, I'm sure all of you know, the police conducted mass arrests and arrested close to 24,000 individuals all over the country, and including several hundred opposition party leaders, activists. We've been saying this repeatedly, it shouldn't be a crime to hold opposing political views. But we also issued a statement recently including an analysis of verified photos and video footages from protests, as well as collection of eyewitness statements. There we actually talk about, we're not talking about excessive use of force anymore. We're talking about unlawful use of force, because you see, state is the duty bearer. State has a right to protect. That takes priority. So when an eyewitness statement and video footages correspondingly that we analyzed show that it was the police who initiated the attacks and fired tear gas that violated people's right to protest. That not only violates the constitutional guarantee, but many other international guidelines that, such as the general comments on right to peaceful assembly, the code of conduct on law enforcement officials. I can go on and on and on. Because the situation is serious because there have been instances, it didn't happen this time, but there have been instances where the police fired rubber bullets as well as live bullets at protesters, resulting in deaths. That again brings me to the earlier point I mentioned of impunity. What happened to these investigations into the use of lethal weapons against protesters, if there were any investigations, and how far along these investigations proceeded? Have the perpetrators being held accountable? Again, speaking of impunity, the thing is, issues such as enforced disappearances that Sanjida will speak in detail after me, they are never just standalone crimes. Amnesty International has investigated that many of these cases, there are clear patterns of enforced disappearances followed by extrajudicial executions. That again includes torture, other ill treatments. So the number of ED has dropped in the last few years, but the issue is still there in the country. That has led to shrinking space for civil society as organizations as Odhikar, who've been working on enforced disappearances, are being targeted. So it's not just impunity around the initial crime, you're looking at a vicious cycle that has many layers of human rights violations that impacts many groups. In most of these cases where journalists and activists are targeted, we're looking at situations of who is safe to raise human rights issues in the country, as Ali basically explained in his presentation. So how in practice it's the state that decides whether these activists are being persecuted or not. It's up to the state to determine whether the human rights are protected or not. So I think that's where all of these are leading to narrowing down to the willingness of the state. Usually states come up with treaties, passing laws, but they also try to change discourse. Governments also take action when there's intense domestic and international criticism. So it's important to ensure that these actions that the government takes are not strategic, not towards these critics, but actual comprehensive efforts to change the outcome of the human rights situation of the country. We saw several examples of this in relation to the recent DSA news, where several people have expressed satisfaction at the repeal of the act without fully understanding what has transpired. So I think it's important that ambassadors, foreign officials focusing on Bangladesh should consult their country experts and wait to see what the cybersecurity bill entails before expressing dissatisfaction. The international community has a responsibility to analyze and monitor and comment on human rights issues, not just react to these brief updates. The other broad issue is, like Meenakshi said, all of this is happening at the verge of an election. There's the Rohingya issues, the lack of funding. There's a huge responsibility for the international community, as well as there's a responsibility for the Bangladesh government not to violate Rohingya rights of the Rohingya refugees. But all of this happening at the verge of elections, it's very important to note that human rights are protected leading up to the election, during the election, and after the election. I'm really looking forward to how the discussion unfolds. Thank you.
Great, Yasmin, thank you very much. And welcome to those who have joined us. I guess it's a good sign in an event like this where the number of participants or the number of attendees keeps increasing. I'd also note that we have a good viewership right now on Facebook Live who's following this discussion, and there's a lively discussion in the chat on Facebook as well. So thank you to all who've joined. For those of you who missed the opening remarks or the beginning of the program, a video recording of this will be posted afterwards on YouTube and on our Facebook page, so you can go back and review that. Finally, we have a number of good questions that have come in, but keep the questions coming. There'll be some new areas and then also some opportunities to expand on what our presenters have said. So to close off our opening remarks, I now invite Sanjida Islam from Meyer Doc to provide some opening comments, and then we'll get into a question and answer period. So Sanjida, over to you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Right to Freedom, for letting me be a part of this session. I'm representing MyDuck, which is an organization of families, each of whom has a relative that was picked up by the Bangladesh law enforcement authorities, sometimes over the last 14 years, and is subject to continuing enforced disappearances. MyDuck, which means Mother's Call, started working in 2014 to advocate for the enforced disappearances in Bangladesh and the release of those currently secretly detained outside the criminal justice system by government authorities. My brother was abducted, Shahidul Islam Shumon. He was the General Secretary of 25 number ward here in Dhaka on 4th of December 2013, which was just before the election of 2014. Who were targeted before the election on these abductions and disappearances and killings are, they are mainly the grassroots level people who have mobilizing capacity and also have that ability to maintain relation door to door. So Awami League and the government targeted those people's leaders. They may not be the prominent, famous national leaders, but in their own community, they are very well connected, strong organizer. And by doing all such things, government wanted to create a panic and fear psychosis in the society as a whole across Bangladesh. And this situation is complemented and collaborated by the law enforcement agencies and the justice institutions of this country. And we have visited, submitted applications, met all the parties related with this law enforcement agencies in Bangladesh, including the government officials, and appealed multiple times to know about our missing family members and urged to do a transparent investigation and take necessary action to find our family members. But always their silence and continuous ignorance and such responses justify their all ill motives. Beside all FIR cases and all habeas corpus petitions before the High Court, I think not a single family, victim family, have received any assertive remedy from the High Court. Right now, there are almost 3.9 million cases against all opposition activists, all defenders, general people, journalists who are raising their voices, who are trying to express their freedom of expression. Pursuant to the sanction on RAB and others by the US government, the numbers of extrajudicial killing and enforced disappearances have been reduced dramatically. And this circumstantial evidence demonstrate that the allegations of systematic killings and disappearances brought by the victim families and others against the law enforcement agencies merit consideration. In addition to the above, it is now well perceived in home and abroad that this government, having political motives involved in serious human rights abuses. It is to note that the institutions like police, judiciary, other law enforcement agencies, election commission, civil administration, constitutional and statutory bodies, and so on hearing, Bangladesh have become dysfunctional and or subservient to the vicious cycle of the authoritarian regime. The political goons, having direct support from police, even dared to attack general people on the road, opposition activists, even to the ambassadors who were while visiting the victim families. Taking into the gravity of the situation, the visit of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in her last report in 2022 had offered the government to extend UN cooperation to conduct credible investigations of the cases of major human rights violations. But this government has not even responded to that call. Given the said premises, we strongly believe that no credible investigation on those issues can be possible under the domestic investigation mechanism. And besides the UN working group, Human Rights Watch also identified, and they have published a report about the 86 men to know their whereabouts who were picked up by the law enforcement agencies. And till now, those also from the government, we have not received any of the responses. And this number of enforced disappearances and then extrajudicial killing is really high. If we say till now, the documented cases of enforced disappearances are over 650, and extrajudicial killing is more than 2,600. You can have this all data on the Asian Human Rights Commission and also the Bangladesh Capital Punishment Justice System's website. Right. These enforced disappearances to us are done by the law enforcement agencies in order to eliminate mainly the political opponent. By doing this, the election system has collapsed as a whole from 2014 onwards, and it is deteriorating. Right to vote is snatched, massively increased the abduction, arrest, and they are maintaining a different mechanism now, keeping them for 3 to 5 days and showing them arrest for any of the terror cases. Crime against humanity only for retaining illegitimate power. Corruption has become fundamental due to the absence of democracy. This authoritarian attitude of the government and her trusted team members, especially the commanding officers of the law enforcement agencies. If you say in terms of freedom of expression, social media like Facebook is also now collaborating with government by recruiting local staff to silence the critics and to block the critical content and also dispose all the corruptions done by them. Our mainstream media, over 95% are owned by managed by the ruling party people. They face forced sponsorship and self-sponsorship. In that content, social media could have been a platform to the general people, but this is now also collaborating with the government. We have seen in several occasions, several protests in Dhaka and across Bangladesh, mobile network was also down on the whole area, so that general people, activists could not communicate with each other. And we have seen the broadcasters who were also beaten, picked up and tortured and stopped by the law enforcement agencies and all the Awami League people. And all these aforesaid situations have been monitored by the different international organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, UN Working Group, USA, UK, EU, European Union, and then so on. As Maydak from this platform, we always requested and raised our voices to have a proper investigation, to have our brothers back, actually, to have them back and to get them back from the secret detention cells to the families. We want them alive. And beside that, now in this scenario, because we have started working from 2014 onwards, and now it is more than 10 years, we request from our side to everyone that mainly the international community should also raise their voice to make the justice delivery system effective, to pursue the restoration of democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Bangladesh. I thank you, everyone, and I'll go for the question session. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sanjita. I have to say that we've made history here today, because in over 30 years of being a diplomat and being involved in international affairs, this is the first event I've ever been to where the panelists kept to the assigned time for their opening remarks. So thank you and congratulations to our panelists. We have some really good questions that have come in from our attendees, which I'll be going through in a moment. But first I wanted to check with Ambassador Milam to see if, Bill, do you have a question for any of the panelists?
Actually, I have quite a few, but I think I will pass because I think for the most part, their discussions were very interesting and extremely, and I think we ought to get to the questions that will delve into each panelist discussion rather than something general I was going to ask. So we'll come back at the end maybe, and if there's a room, I might ask some questions.
Great, Bill, thanks. We'll have about 30 minutes for questions. So what I'll do is I will go through the questions that have been asked. There are some that are duplicative, so I'll try to merge those. But I'll also take my prerogative as a moderator and start with a question, which I'll leave to the four of you. And this is a question that those of us with Right to Freedom, and I assume the other organizations, get all the time from those who are, say, more or less critical of the regime. They'll say that there have been human rights violations committed by other governments in Bangladesh's history, military governments, democratic governments, caretaker governments. So they'll ask, why are we paying so much attention or so much focus to what's happening now and to the human rights issues under the Awami League government? So how would any of you like to respond to this question, which I'm sure you'll also get from time to time?
You want me to go first?
Sure, Meenakshi. Yes, sure.
Well, it is not just previous governments of Bangladesh that are accused of having had poor human rights records. Quite often, we are also told about other governments. For instance, why is the US talking about human rights in Bangladesh and why they're not considering human rights situation in their own countries and so on and so forth? And it is all true. And as much as we would like Bangladesh to stop its human rights abuses, and extremely egregious ones at that, and ensure accountability and end impunity, issues that my colleagues have just spoken of, we would also like Bangladesh to take a stand on human rights violations elsewhere. That is what the universal, human rights world order wanted to promote. It was a standard like that. So trying to point to someone else's faults is not going to solve the situation that you are responsible for right now, which is what you owe to your own people. And right now, the government of Bangladesh owes to the people of Bangladesh a secure environment where they're not forever wondering whether tomorrow they're going to be cross-fired or disappeared or tortured or have their loved ones disappear, or that, a Facebook post could drag them into jail. That is not a very rights-respecting government. And those standards should be upheld at home as much as Bangladesh demands that's those standards of other people. You're muted.
Sorry, I was just wondering, do any of our other presenters want to comment on that, or would you prefer that we move on to the other questions?
Yeah, I can comment, because that's something that we get a lot as well. But Meenakshi put it very very accurately, that there are rights violations happening right now, and why not talk about that? And this is the whataboutism that we get, right? Or what about this? What about that? What about? So it's, the thing is, what about the rights violations that are happening right now? And why we focus on the government is that right now, at this moment, it's the responsibility of the government. Whatever the political party is, whoever's governing has the responsibility to protect human rights. That is what we're doing. We're calling on the government to do their job. Simple as that.
Great, thanks, Yasasmeen.
John, let me add to this and echo what Yasasmeen and Meenakshi has already said. In case of Bangladesh, the history of human rights violation is not new. There is no doubt about it. Previous governments, you mentioned political governments such as one led by BNP, or for that matter, caretaker government has been accused of, and quite rightfully so, that they have violated. We can recall those situations where even legal impunity has been provided through the parliament. Those needs to be mentioned. Nobody is trying to, or at least I am not trying to condone those things. In equal measures, we can say that human rights violations are taking place in the United States and elsewhere. And we should speak, and I do, and others do speak, such as the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and other rights groups do speak about it. But that should not justify, by no means it justifies the violation of human rights. Because the loved ones who are lost, either because of extrajudicial killing, is your loved ones. The person who has disappeared is your loved ones, your family. And if we specifically talk about Bangladesh, Bangladesh was established, the commitment of Bangladesh establishment in 1971 was one of the three principles was human dignity. Had it been previously trampled by other governments, they need to be held accountable as much as the current one, and we speak, and you must speak of the current one because that is the reality on the ground today. Yesterday or tomorrow are the ones that is going to be affecting you as a citizen, and as a citizen, Bangladeshis as well as global citizen, those who speak of human rights, such as Amnesty International, needs to speak out. That is how I see it.
Great, thank you, Ali. Sanjita, would you like to comment on this at all?
Yes, if you allow me. As a victim, and I know how I feel when I'm searching for my brother and my people like my brother who are secretly detained. We don't know what happened with them. We are standing for the justice from our side. Something happened wrong in previously that cannot be continued. No, or we should stop somewhere, and then we have to stand for the right things to do. And it is government's responsibility to ensure that we are securing those rights for the people. And they should find out where these people are, and they should clarify and respond to the people of the country. So I think we are standing for the justice and ensuring that people are living with their rights. Thank you.
Great, thanks to all the panelists for giving me some talking points that I can use going forward. I learned a lot with that answers to those questions as well. A couple of our presenters talked briefly about the Rohingya refugees, and we have some questions as well to follow up on that. The first comes from Kimberly Stanton from the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Kimberly writes that some people are hesitant to criticize Bangladesh's human rights record because there is appreciation for the state's decision to accept the Rohingya refugees. Recognizing that it's not the topic of this briefing, can you say anything about the situation of the Rohingya, and how would you respond to the concern to not offend Bangladesh because they are hosting the Rohingya? And on a similar same topic, but a slightly different note, Tariq Choyan asks that, or notes that high-level government officials several times have said, we are hosting 1 million Rohingya refugees. Isn't that defending human rights? Don't teach us what human rights is. What's your observation in this regard? So again, I'll open the floor if somebody wants to talk about the Rohingya issue as a human rights issue and how to balance the international community's desire to see Bangladesh respond to the needs of Rohingya refugees while at the same time looking at broader human rights issues. And actually, we asked you to go first last time, so I'll give you some time to collect your thoughts, but would one of the other presenters like to talk on those two issues?
I can go first.
Please, yes.
So that's actually a very good point. Where do you strike the balance? Where do you commend the government? Yes, this is great. You're hosting 1 million Rohingya. That's a great thing that the government of Bangladesh is doing. But that does not counter the human rights violations that are being committed. Not just that, keeping Rohingya in the country itself is not enough. This is why I said there is a responsibility for the national government as well as to the international community for the protection of Rohingya. There has to be adequate funding. There has to be facilities supplied. There has to be support for the government to ensure that rights of the Rohingya are protected. But on the other hand, the government should stop with forced relocations to Bash and Shah. The government should actively find ways to educate the Rohingya children. There are about 500,000 children in the camps. So the responsibility lies on both, while you can also say like the government has a responsibility as well here. Where you strike the balance when reaching out to the government is something that is very interesting. Some I understand that some organizations seem to, some entities seem to overlook the rights violations by the government for the same reason. But where we stand, I think it's possible to acknowledge the good work and comment on where more work is needed and tell the government when human rights are being violated.
Great, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to talk about the issue of Rohingya and how that impacts the overall human rights situation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks so much. I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that to be a refugee is one of the most horrible things that can happen to anyone. You leave behind all that you know and love, because everything that is familiar, because you really are risking, you're trying to save your own lives. And it's often people try and conflate a refugee situation with one of irregular migration, which also is driven by a lot of desperation, but is often more economic, while the refugee situations are almost always much more immediate in terms of risk to life and limb. To that extent, I would say that in the work that we do, and this is, I suppose, because we can take a bit of a macro view because we work on so many different countries, that no government is presenting a very good sort of example on protection of refugee rights. In fact, I remember the time when the refugees first started arriving in 2017 and standing there and watching ordinary Bangladeshis bring food and clothes in by truckloads to help the refugees. Now, there is refugee fatigue. We understand that, but we also understand, and this is where I think there is a problem, because while it is true that the onus of trying to hold the Myanmar junta to account for the abuses that they visited upon the Rohingya, to create safe places, safe conditions for return, lies with the international community, the Bangladesh government has altered its own narrative. From a time when the Prime Minister came and said that she was willing to accommodate the refugees, we are now finding that to be called a Rohingya is almost like an abusive term. Like Bangladeshis will say to each other, oh, stop being a Rohingya. I mean, that it is that level of humiliation and insult that is visited upon a community as desperate as the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So much more needs to be done. And Bangladesh's hope that they can, force these people to return when the conditions are not safe is misplaced, because it will pretty much in these conditions of desperation just force them back or force them onto boats where they will be bouncing around in the Bay of Bengal. And what is much more needed is for Bangladesh to invest long-term to ensure that the refugees have access to education and livelihood, because then they can contribute to Bangladeshi society and not be treated as the burden that they are being treated as right now. Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Meenakshi. If there's no other comments, I'll move on to the next question. And again, we've gotten a number of questions. I hope we'll get to all of them, but we'll get to as many as we can. And again, we'll try to condense some of them because a number of the questions touch on similar areas. We have a question now from a good friend, Owen Lippert from Opposition International, former National Democratic Institute chief of party in Bangladesh, a person who knows Bangladesh very well. Owen asks or notes that political accountability of the police is a difficult issue in every jurisdiction. Why is the issue of police conduct not an issue raised in the National Assembly? Could an all-party legislative committee be a political initiative if the scope covered past as well as current government performance? Ali, I don't know if you want to take this on and talk about the role of Parliament.
Yeah, I would love to respond to it, particularly the question comes from Owen, who knows so well about Bangladesh and keeps up with Bangladesh situation almost on an everyday basis. And this is an opportunity to interact with him as well. Why the police issue is not being discussed or being, held accountable in the National Assembly. The response, the most blatant or blunt response would be because this is a one-party parliament. There's no way this parliament can actually hold anyone accountable. Does it? Did it hold anybody accountable? Did it hold those who have defaulted the bank loans accountable for that? The mismanagement of economy, for example, the absurdity that we have seen in case of energy sector, because this is a political question. When I know you know too, that this is a political, how the parliament has been constituted through the election, wherein the police became an integral part of delivering that victory, right? Can you hold them accountable? Let me give you one example, and this is, again, I tend to pick up from the media, given the situation. On July 6th, there was a meeting of the police, high-ranking official police, which was chaired by the DIG, and the senior officers were instructed to expedite the cases against opposition. There is a written minutes to it. It was published in Bangladeshi press as well as in international. And look, what is the meeting says? By any means, and I'm quoting it, literally quoting it. By any means, the government has to win the election. BNP and JI have to be, declared disqualified for the election. This is the police. Can a national parliament, which is elected through the 2018 election, or even for that matter, 2014 election, can they hold anyone accountable from the police? That is the problem. That's a political problem. And that's why I say that if an inclusive election is held, and I don't get it, why the government is so afraid of it. Because if they think that they've done an extremely well job with respect to Rohingya issue, they take credits, people give credit, there are questions, but in general, it is a very positive. Government claims that economy has done well. I tend to disagree with that, but the government claims, let it be tested by the people. So the all party, well, how many parties are we talking about in the National Assembly? We are talking, right? So that's the problem. But generally speaking, yes, it is equal in some measures. We have seen how holding police accountable in the United States has been a problem. Right? The defunding the police movement and Black Lives Matter and everywhere. We have seen the police atrocities and brutality, which I am opposed to, and I have been on the street on many occasions protesting that these are the things that needs to stop. But we cannot expect that this would happen in a parliament, which is de facto one-party parliament. And this parliament was delivered, the victory was delivered by the police, among others.
Great, thanks, Ali. The next couple of questions, one is directed to Meenakshi, and then there's a very similar question from a more personal perspective for Sanjita. And it has to do with the role of human rights defenders in Bangladesh. And it's maybe not surprising that these questions came anonymously. How can people protect themselves and continue working for upholding human rights? The questioner notes it's extremely challenging to continue work under continued surveillance from the government. And then another anonymous question directly for Sanjita. Could you share some of your experiences about the price and the ordeals that your family has gone through since your brother was picked up? So maybe Meenakshi first, and then Sanjita, if you can give your perspective. So thank you both.
Thank you so much. And I think Sanjita's experience is going to be much more telling. But I will only say that it's what I began with when I said defending human rights, not just in Bangladesh. Again, these are challenges that are in many parts of the world right now, that as governments become more authoritarian, there is a tendency almost to clamp down on anyone that can sort of expose some of the shortcomings or the more serious abuses that are taking place. It takes immense courage. It takes often, Yasmin spoke about the work that Amnesty did, which is to look at open source, material, you look at videos and so on and try and determine truths. Internet has given us, for its blessings and its sins, opportunities as well, which makes many abuses hard to hide. But I will just, before I pass it to Sanjita for her experience, I will just say, on August 10th, it'll be 10 years since Adilur Rahman Khan was picked up and detained. And he has been facing trial. This is one of the most prominent voices on human rights in the world from Bangladesh. And this is a man that has been, facing judicial harassment, has been detained, and is most likely, we fear, going to not get a very fair outcome from this sentencing, just because of what Ali just talked about, because of the sort of the police that is now quite determined to lock up people. And I suppose we should be grateful that they're not being disappeared, which is when I will pass to Sanjida, because that struggle, and I've known her for a long time. I've met her mom, and I know how hard it has been for the family. So yeah, all respect, Sanjida.
Thank you. If you say the experience, while they have picked up my brother from 2013 till now, there's I'll say from my family, it's not only one person when they pick and make them disappear, that only he is, suffering that. It's not that. It's all my family members. My elderly mother, she is 75 now, and Shumon Bhai, who is disappeared, he has 2 daughters. They have, the younger one is forgetting the father's face now, and we know each night, this 1,000 nights, how we pass, counting the days. We expect that my brother will be staying alive there, but passing each day with that hope that how he is, suffering in that secret detention cells, which came out from different persons who were released after their disappearances, and who were abducted and hidden and kept in the secret detention cells. So I know that horrible experiences I heard from them, and we are passing each day with that pathetic experiences. And I'm hopeful. I'm still hopeful. I'm counting my days to see my brother back, because we expect that nobody is beyond the law, and no one can have citizen in a country like us, that they can keep them, in those secret detention cell, just to be in the power. And these people who they have abducted and they are not criminals. They are just opposition activists. That cannot be a reason. And if there is any complaint allegation against them, they can go for trial. So the experience, it is not only my experience, I'm saying, it is experience for all those victim families. I have told you that documented enforced disappearances numbers are 650 and above. But really, in the fact is, the real number, which it will be 3 times higher than that, if we go, because there are families who have not raised their cases. There are families who there is nobody from their family to raise, and they're disappeared for many years. And I really expect that we will get justice. We will have proper investigation through the proper justice system, and that's why we want to change this authoritarian government. And we don't want any other family to experience what we are going through. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that testimony, Sanjida. Yasmin, do you have any words for human rights defenders from Amnesty's perspective, or your own personal perspective, that you want to add to the discussion?
So it's very much like Meenakshi said. It's an ongoing issue in so many countries that we're working on, that where do they draw the line? Where do we draw the line? And every time we work on statements, on research, on campaigns, our mission becomes like how to protect the HRDs on the ground who are giving us the information, because they are at more risk. I think this is an ongoing conversation. I think everybody has a role to play in this, and understand the risks. But I don't have an exact answer to your question, because again, where do we stand? Where does everybody stand when the government is against you? But like Meenakshi said, there are like cases of like very prominent human rights defenders, cases against them, who have such strong voices. And I think well, personally for me, I draw inspiration from all of them, but all I can say is like, let's keep the conversation going. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Ali, maybe from the perspective of both a journalist and an academic, any advice for academics and journalists in Bangladesh trying to navigate their professional responsibilities and their vocation with their own personal security challenges?
It is a challenging situation, and it happens not only currently in Bangladesh, it's not only happening in Bangladesh, but if you look at other places in Cambodia, for example, that I often refer to. The fundamental point that one has to ask, standing in front of the mirror, that, you know, speaking truth to the power, that's the difficult choice. That's a difficult choice. How do you navigate those kind of things? Most important thing is to be driven by the fact, driven by the data, driven by the understanding that what it means. If you're talking of the academics, I see their role as to provide the facts in an unfiltered way, to explain it to the people that this is what it is, without fear. I know it's tall order, because if you're living in a society like, you have to navigate, this is difficult. Yet, it is a responsibility that if you call yourself intellectual, if you call yourself as academic with conscience, you have to do it at some point. That is it not only challenging, it could be perilous, right? It could, but that is what it is. The journalist, my request, my plea to the journalist in Bangladesh as well as elsewhere, but most importantly, in this instance to Bangladesh, that it is incumbent on them to tell the truth. It is. That's why they have become journalists. It is incumbent on them to tell the truth. Wherever you can, however you can, put it out. Stop being a partisan. Don't reproduce and and circulate misinformation, disinformation, and sometimes outright lies. Remember that lies, misinformation has a very short life actually. They're going to die, in the sense that people would know. Don't think people are stupid, that they will keep on understanding that this is the truth. This is real life. This is truth. That's what I don't have a magic wand. I don't have a crystal ball to suggest, and I'm not in a position to tell exactly what they would. But these are my way of requesting them, my plea to them, that please try to do this as much as you can.
Great, thank you, Ali, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we have time for one more question, so I will bring a number of questions together in a final question for the panelists, and then I'll hand it over to Ambassador Milam to say a few words in wrapping things up. And the question really deals with both the general and the specific. So we have a number of questions specifically about issues like elections or the Digital Security Act or follow-up on enforced disappearances. So there are a number of discrete human rights issues that need to be worked on in Bangladesh. So the question really is the role of the international community. The questioners or the attendees note that there are some governments, some members of the international community that have chosen to be more supportive of the current government, others which perhaps have been more critical. So again, in this balance of inside and outside, we've talked about the role of human rights defenders within the country, but could each of you maybe offer just a brief word on what role you think the international community both governments, multilateral organizations, and human rights groups and groups like Right to Freedom. What can we all do to help improve the situation in Bangladesh? So why don't we just maybe go in reverse order from how we started, give Sanjita the first word, then we'll go to Ali, Yasmin, and Meenakshi. We'll wrap it up and then we'll go to Bill. So Sanjita, what would you like to see from the international community?
I think in our current scenario here in Bangladesh, the response we are seeing from the international community is quite strong in few cases, in few areas, and neutral in few areas, and maybe opposite on some areas. But I'd like to point on that like who is strongly raising what is right to the people, what is happening and what is expected to have the change to the country, and which will be actually good for the general people, and which will show the results, what is expected as a country who is preserving the rights of the general people, who will be ensuring people are not beaten and tortured and having those cases, and people are not getting disappeared for just doing the opposition activity. So I think from the international community, I think as I have already requested, and then we have seen, we expect from all of them just that they should be also stand beside us and raise their voices to have the justice delivery systems effective, and to pursue the restoration of the democracy, which is lacked in here in Bangladesh, and rule of law and human rights in Bangladesh.
Great, thank you, Sanjita. Ali, from your perspective, what can the international community do?
There are two things, John, when we talk about international community and the international organizations such as Human Rights Watch. I make a distinction between them. Insofar as the international community, i.e. the governments are concerned, my question to them, whatever we are discussing today didn't appear overnight. There was a process of the democratic backsliding in Bangladesh, and they've contributed to it. The international community in some ways have contributed to it. They have been either providing corrosive capital or being supportive, or at least remain silent when all things happen. So it is now their responsibility to step up, act, and take responsibility for their failings that they have done. That includes, what considerations left them to remain engaged. Engagement is necessary, but does not mean they need to be condoning this kind of thing. In some instances, I see the governments have done it. They need to step up and catch up in their responsibility. That is what I expect them to do. Insofar as the international organizations are concerned, thanks to Amnesty International, thanks to Human Rights Watch, thanks to Asian Human Rights Commission, and also others have stepped up and continued over the years in documenting and the situation. I expect them to continue that and use their leverage, whatever they have, with the respective government and international bodies, including the United Nations, to insist on, first of all, providing the information, the situation on the ground, and recommending what actions that can be taken to mitigate the situation. This is a responsibility they have been shouldering, thanks to them. But in a sense, the time is running out, and in the coming months, they need to do it far more strongly than they have done it. That's what are my suggestions.
Great, thanks, Ali. Yes, Yasmin, any thoughts more on the role of the international community?
Hi, so I saw the time and I'll try to keep it very brief. I also make a distinction of human rights organizations as well as international community at large, as in governments. For the organizations, I think the main role that I say is monitor, document, continue with call for actions, and mobilize and be an ally, be a supporter of the human rights defenders back home and protection of human rights in general. As for the governments, there are so many mechanisms at their disposal that they can use to raise human rights violations with those who are in power. And I'm not really sure how often this happens, but every time these delegations visit, we normally send a small briefing like, these are the human rights violations if you wanna raise them. The simplest answer is we use them, just talk about them, and try to make governments accountable. Use what is at your disposal. There's so much of agreements, bilateral meetings that happen that can be beneficial for the protection of human rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Meenakshi will give you the last word on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. I mean, my colleagues have all spoken so eloquently, but here is what I want to say, which I'll take the old lady privilege to say. You know, when we were growing up, our parents just always say, you know, your friends, who your friends are is who you become, and so on and so forth. So here is what I think we want to say to the friends of Bangladesh, to governments who have strategic, economic, and other interests, which makes Bangladesh an attractive partner for them. I would say here, you know, all problems in all governments that we've alluded to, here is what Bangladesh government has done to families like Sangeeta's. When someone has disappeared, senior ministers, senior police officers have turned around and said to them, oh, your brother has fled because of bad debts. Your husband is having an affair. That is the government that you want to be friends with. And I would urge all people that want to partner with Bangladesh to remember that, you know, in all the countries that we work, in all the human rights challenges that we face, it is very seldom that a government is this cruel to a family that is searching for their loved one. You know, they might, and therefore, if they can say this, we have to be very careful about what kind of friends they're choosing.
Great. Thank you very much, Meenakshi. So I will now take the opportunity to apologize to those attendees whose questions I wasn't able to get to. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for the questions, and we will certainly take those on board at Right to Freedom. Also, thank you to all of you who attended, and thank you to our presenters. I think we learned a lot, not just the substance in today's discussion, which was outstanding, but also from a Right to Freedom perspective, we learned about the logistics of a virtual event, and we'll huddle together afterwards and see how we can maybe do some more of this going forward, given the interest, given the engagement of everyone. So with that, I will turn it over to our president, Ambassador Milam, who will give us his parting words and send us on our way. So Bill, over to you.
Well, thank you, John. My parting words are that I'm sorry we're parting so soon. I mean, it seems like just a few minutes ago that we started. It's been an extremely interesting discussion. One of the best I've been a part of. I haven't been much of a part of this one, except as a listener. But let me tell you something. Maybe this is the final word. You might have thought that I was sitting here and it was just my duty to sit here and listen to you and listen to the discussion. I might have thought that too when it started, but to tell you the truth, it's been a real privilege to be here and listen to the discussion because it has been a fascinating discussion, very insightful. Has given me many insights, many questions, which it's too late to ask now. But maybe I hope we can do this again sometime and get our speakers back because it's been. I'd love to have a little more time with them. But to the speakers and to everybody who's out there, thank you very much for attending. It's been a real pleasure for me to be here, and I hope it's been a pleasure for you too.
Great, thank you, Bill. So as noted at the beginning, we've recorded today's session. We will post the video link online. For those of you who have been in touch with Right to Freedom before, look for for future communications. For those who want to learn more about our work, you can visit us on the web, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. And our Executive Director, Mushfiq Fazal Ansari, and Program Assistant Abdur Rahim are always available to consult with you. We welcome your partnership, and we share the same goal of a better future for the people of Bangladesh and the broader region. So with that, we will conclude today's session, and I wish you all the best going forward. So thank you very much. Okay, so we've stopped recording. Again, thank you to all the panelists. That was outstanding. Thank you, and thank you, Mushfiq and Bill. So I will leave here, and again, Mushfiq, I don't know if you have to end the chat, but thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. And any follow-up questions, please feel free to get in touch with Mushfiq or any of us. And if you have suggestions on how we could do this differently or better in the future, we're all ears.
Thank you, John. You can end the session.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.